Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another Agility Leadership Network meetup. It's great to be here with my fellow co-host, Ashley. Hey, Ash.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hey, so tonight we've got a fantastic talk, which has actually generated a lot of interest, even in the conversation prior to us actually starting the meetup officially, around the world of finance in Agile. And actually, you know, it's great that we've got a friend of the community, Dean, here again this evening, coming and talking to us. And he's actually got a talk titled over here, No Longer Distant Cousins, Agile Working with Finance. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. And Dean, I'm going to hand over to you. Ashley and myself will be able to help with questions throughout, and Ash and I will come back in at the end and also help with Q&A, so we can support you there. So over to you, Dean.
Fantastic, Giles. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and Ashley for continuing to support not only in this meetup, but all the great work that you do along with Giles to help support the community and create a home for us for now in the digital sense, but no doubt in a few months' time we'll all be able to meet up and do this in a co-located environment. So thank you for your ongoing support. So I'm just going to share my screen. Just bear with me as I get myself sorted out here. Okay, just bear with me. Here we go. Can people see the opening slide?
Yes.
Deck
yeah.
On that URL in the top right-hand corner. I had this strap line of no longer distant cousins. In a place of high uncertainty, where organizations need to rapidly find what things to continue a lot closer than distant cousins. They need to be having conversations on a daily basis to be able to navigate this amazingly complex, emergent and uncertain world that we're all living in now. Certainly in the last 12 months or so, that's been very, very apparent. So this is, I think, is a, let's call it a call to arms for both people in the financial side of things and the agile side of things to have good conversations, see how they can support their organizations in a better way. So before diving into it, I just want to share a few words on myself. I've had the good fortune of working for a number of different household named organizations. And I would say that the things I'm sharing now, the stories that I'm going to be sharing with you, does add color to some of the, let's call them improvement opportunities where Agile and Finance can work closely together. I'm also the founding editor of a non-profit print-only publication called The Agilist. Some of you may be aware of it, and if you're subscribed to it, then thank you very much for supporting that publication. When we're all back being co-located, I'm going to be distributing The Agilist at different meetups, so feel free to reach out and pick up a copy and leaf through those pages. It's a digest for the best thinking and the best thought leadership in the lean agile space. So do reach out and pick up a copy if you get hold of one. So to this talk, I'd like to pick up on Evan Laybourne's definition of business agility. So he says that business agility is the ability of a business system to rapidly respond to change. And as I said, in the last 12 months, it's become really, really apparent how we need to be able to support the companies, the clients that we work with, to allow them to really embody this notion of business agility. And it's my belief that Agile has a very good place in this, and it's emerging from technology and going into other areas. And one other area for that is with finance. However, there's a challenge with the way in which organizations have been have traditionally budgeted, which I'm going to go into now. So problems with traditional budgeting, that's the first area that I'm going to go into. Then I'm going to be introducing a concept called beyond budgeting, and this is a movement which is quite radical, and it actually reconceives how teams, business units, and organizations should be financed. And it actually goes beyond that as well. As about how can individuals, teams, managers, and leaders be able to work in a fast changing world in a complex environment. So that's the reason why there's beyond budgeting as well. It goes beyond the financial aspect. And the third area that I'm going to bring into play is techniques for agile budgeting. And I'm going to be bringing on board real life stories of where I've been involved and help clients be able to create a marriage between those two different areas. I'm going to be pausing now and again to catch my breath, but also to allow you guys to perhaps pose a question, perhaps Giles or Ash can just say if there's any questions that people have posed, but also take the opportunity to unmute yourself as well. We can also show ourselves on camera and actually talk as well. So feel free to do that. But first of all, let's dive into the current problems with traditional budgeting. Okay, so here's some of the characteristics of traditional budgeting. So what tends to happen at the start of a calendar year or the corporation's financial year is a business plan is based on assumptions about the outside world. And that could be around how customers interact, the competition, the economy, and world events, and also thinking about internal operations. So a budget tends to be assigned based on those beliefs and those convictions and those assumptions. This is traditional financial budgeting. And this all combines to paint a picture of potential performance for different business units or the organization as a whole. What about the elements of traditional budgeting? So I've got about 5 or 6 elements here. So one element of traditional budgeting is there's a targeted element, and that target tends to be set at the beginning of that year, of the 12-month cycle. Also, incentives are set, and individuals' incentives are tied quite often to how well those financial incentives or outcomes are met. Also, a plan is created quite often in great detail. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears put into putting in a plan to win the budget for that 12-month cycle to begin. Also, quite often, resources are allocated and fixed throughout the year. So that's another element of traditional budgeting. A fifth element is around measurement. So performance is judged based on the original plan at the start of the 12-month cycle. And then finally, coordination is also set. So how we coordinate ourselves, the different teams, individuals, business units, tends to be how well it's adhered to the original plan. So there's also a coordination element here as well. So this assumes the environment during those 12 months is predictable. It's a nice straight road. We can see all the way to the horizon. So the budget is optimized for this ideal environment that we believe is going to unfold as the 12 months occur. And then our plans are optimized for that certain future. But people in the Agile community, as you guys are, know that that is not going to be the case. It's not going to be a nice straight road. Yet the budget is tied to that belief, that assumptions, those assumptions which are conceived and used at the start of the 12-month cycle. In fact, the environment is unknown, yet the budget is inflexible. There are many impediments and disasters and roadblocks which we cannot even anticipate. So the environment is more variable than anticipated, and the budget doesn't match the actual environment. So it's a real problem, and it's a perennial problem. This happens year in, year out for many, many large organizations. So thinking about some of the problems with traditional budgeting, there's a great deal of bureaucracy. Detailed budgeting consumes a lot of time. It's costly and wasteful. I've worked for large organizations where I've seen senior managers spend weeks, if not a small number of months before the 12-month cycle starts, trying to get together as much detail as possible to be able to put together a compelling business case based on assumptions about what they believe they're going to be achieving in the 12 months. Also, there's a degree of inflexibility. It's difficult to adapt to new circumstances. And what's really important as well is that people are judged about how well they adhere to the original plan, yet they may know that the original plan is not a poor fit for the reality they've uncovered. And so what do they do? They're in a dilemma. Do I stick to the current plan, or do I actually break the rules? Do I do something which isn't set out at the start of the 12 months? It also creates a great deal of internal politics. So do I lower risk? Do I lower my target so I've got a low hurdle which I can easily overcome? And do I sandbag my budgets? Do I make my budgets twice as big plus 20% so I've got as much protection as possible? And then that results in different business units with their own budgets almost going into some kind of turf war, a bit of horse trade, and a great deal of difficulty. And remember, this is all based on assumptions. Another one, which I find absolutely extraordinary, is use it or lose it. So if you don't use all your budget, then if you're only using 80%, then we're only going to give you 80% in the next financial year. So there's no incentive to be efficient, to be judicious and frugal with your resources and your budget. And also, any underutilized resources is deemed as a waste, not actually as a saving or being very lean with your operations or with software or technology or whatever, or the operations that you're working with. So here's some of the problems with traditional planning. I just want to pause there just to allow people just to reflect, and feel free to unmute yourself. Let us know if you identify or any of this kind of resonates with anybody.
Yeah, I can come in, Dean.
Please.
I'm working on this. So reluctantly, I ended up in this. They gave me a choice of where to work, and they said finance, and I said definitely not that. And of course, that's where I've ended up. I think budgets are a form of prediction. I don't think there's a target. I think it's a prediction, and everybody knows that it's flawed, but it's a final sanction. So the budget owners, and a lot of this is to do with operational budget. The budget owners are saying our operating costs, traditional organizations, our operating costs are too high. We need to bring them down. And so I work in a really massive organization. So there's a group and then there's businesses. So the group is saying the bit of the budget that we hold, we will lower it or hold it the same. And inflation means that effectively it's lowered. And that will cause you to save money through being efficient. You will find ways to be more efficient because we're not giving you the budget, the operating budget that you ask for. So I see that there's an operational constraint, an artificial throttle, versus another pot of money which is owned by the business who own the typically called the change the bank, and they're saying we've got revenue opportunities, we can do all this. So they're buying features and products, which of course pushes up the cost of running the organization, which is being held back. So what I see is and they're both well-meaning, right? Both of these are very well-meaning. One's trying to be more efficient and save costs, the other's trying to grow revenue. But because you've got this distributed control of budgetary constraints, you just end up with arbitrage. You end up with them playing against each other. So for me, I think the key word here, and you did mention it on the slide with the road, this is all a predict and control model. Everything comes from predict and control. And because you don't have centralized accountability, the predict and control breaks up into these different, who's responsible for that? Oh, I can game the system. And I think that's what actually causes the problems.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. What you've said resonates with me, and particularly that phrase of predict and control, and
Right.
as opposed to sense and response. So definitely. I also understand you've described well that dynamic or that tension between operational excellence or trying to do more with leaner budgets versus do we actually want to go for growth, or do we actually want to release more features if it's software, or go for market growth in a different region of the world, or whatever it might be. So there's definitely a tension. So thank you for sharing. Anybody else got a thought or a question they'd like to share?
I've got a couple of thoughts. I'm actually an accountant, so it's quite an interesting topic for whether anyone else is. I think there's a few nuances which probably might want to pull out. I think you said it takes a few months to do a budget. I've seen places where you're working on the budget until basically the last minute all year. So it's far bigger problem in finance. There's part of the problem is it's the way that finance is told to control the business. So it's very much a lever. And you'll probably come to this, but budgeting is more about the conversations. Unfortunately, the outcome of it often ends up being used for that control purpose. But the original budgeting back into the 70s and 60s and 50s, when this all became the thing to do, and subsequently has been trained. I've done exams in budgeting, so it's kind of like it's completely ingrained in accountants that this is what to do. So stepping away from it and realizing, well, if it's really easy to predict, why spend lots of time doing it as a budget, rather than if it's impossible to predict because we're living in a VUCA world and it's complex and therefore it's worthless. It's not a happy place for accountants to be. And I think, well, there's reasons. This Beyond Budgeting's been around since 2003 in the book by Jeremy Hope, and obviously he was working on that earlier. So this isn't a new idea, but it's never got traction, even though it's in some of the professional it's in professional exams for, there's different institutes in the UK, and it's definitely in the professional ones for CIMA, which is the management accountants. So yeah, it's sorry, interesting. Carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you, Stephen, for sharing your thoughts there. And you just picked up in a few words there. You said VUCA, and I think you mentioned like an emergent space as well. And I think later on, I'm going to be showing a few slides which actually speaks to that as well. How can Agile and Finance work together to create innovation and entrepreneurialism within a large, say, incumbent organization? So I'm going to be sharing a few thoughts on that as well. Okay, let's move on. Conscious of time. So let's just remind ourselves of Evan Laidbon's description of business agility. So he says business agility is the ability of a business system to rapidly respond to change. And I've told a story of what happens quite often in large organizations is that thinking about Stephen says around the budget should be a artifact or a vehicle or a moment for a conversation. That does not happen very often. It tends to be a lot of time up to the 11th hour, putting a budget in place, then it's locked, the gates are shut, and then we're going to have to fulfill almost like that promise, that commitment, that guarantee that we're going to deliver these outcomes for the business based on, I guess at the start of the year is when we know the least. So this is if this is the case in your organization, then there's a high likelihood that it's going to count against this notion of business agility. Okay, so I'd now like to pick up on Beyond Budgeting. And as Stephen said, this has been around for, almost a couple of decades. And it goes beyond budgeting, goes beyond finance as well, hence the name. So Beyond Budgeting is a management system characterized by flexible financial management processes and a devolved organizational structure. So it's that last bit there in particular, which takes it beyond budgeting. So Beyond Budgeting emphasizes measuring against the environment including the peers, not some internal target. So if the market moves on or the competition makes a move, it's a relative measure against that external market. So it's outward looking as opposed to inward looking. Also, it emphasizes dynamic forecasting, not more forecasting. So we're not trying to predict what's going to happen in November, December 2021 or January 2022. But what we want to do is have dynamic forecasting. And so we're trying to take a few steps, pick ourselves up, look at the horizon. Are we going in the right direction? And then pivot if we need to, or persevere if our current plan is actually correct. So what I've got lined up is just a very short video of a gentleman in a competitive sport who's demonstrating dynamic forecasting rather than forecasting what's going to happen in the next 30 seconds or 60 seconds. So it's a bit of a humorous kind of tangent that I want to share with you around dynamic forecasting. So just bear with me as I cue this up. Okay, 10 points to whoever can name the gentleman. Well, in fact, it's got it on the screen there, so it doesn't matter. So anyway, it's only about 20 seconds long. Hopefully you guys can still see this.
Maradona.
Who was around to witness that on TV?
I was.
There's a few hands up.
Oh, yes.
So this is one of the most famous World Cup goals scored by an absolute genius who sadly passed away a few months ago. But to me, this is a fun example of how Maradona is demonstrating dynamic forecasting rather than more forecasting. He does not know what's going to happen in 20 seconds time, but what he's doing, he knows what the goal is, and he's able to make small adjustments with great agility, great nimbleness, and be able to, fantastic individual effort, but be able to achieve his business outcome in a sense. So I thought I'll share that with you. Okay, I'm going to go back to the presentation now. So yeah, so Beyond Budget talks about dynamic budgeting rather than just trying to have more forecast in many weeks, months, or years into the future. Okay, and there's also this notion around having cohesion, having alignment to some vision or set of strategies without reducing flexibility. So it's allowing teams to have that autonomy and that empowerment to be able to discover what the right things to do are, but still have that degree of alignment to a common set of strategies and organizational vision. So this ties into what I believe good supported governance is about. It's the right people making the right decisions at the right time with the right funding. So this promotes things around collaboration, alignment, and synchronization of work. So a bit of a comparison between common characteristics of traditional budgeting and the beyond budgeting response. How would it suggest things are done in large organizations? So the first one is around structure. So traditionally, there's a hierarchical structure of specialists, and the roles are exploited for scaling. Beyond budgeting would suggest we need to support cross-functional teams, many of the characteristics that we would favor as people in the agile space. The purpose of traditional budgeting may favor delivering returns by executing a predefined plan at the start of the 12 months when the least is known. The beyond budgeting response is to have mission-orientated teams. So they have a mission, they know what their true north is, and there's a budget to support them to be able to navigate through those aha and gotcha moments, which are no doubt going to unfold as they encounter how customers or stakeholders are responding to the product, services, or operations that they're working on. So that's sense of purpose. Authority. So decision making is handled by those at the apex of the organization. That's the traditional way which organizations are run. Thinking about what David Marquet would say is that if you think about an organization as a pyramid, there tends to be individuals and organizations at the bottom of the organization. They tend to be closest to the customer and closest to the problem, and they hold the information. What tends to happen is information is passed up the pyramid through the different management layers to the apex of the organization for a decision to occur. And that decision is then passed back down again for all the different tiers, back down to the teams and individuals at the bottom of the organization to implement. The beyond budgeting response, again, tying into complementary to David Marquette's thinking, is that decision making is delegated far down the organization as possible for one thing, to reduce that learning loop, that feedback cycle before realizing something and actually doing something and trying to serve the customers and stakeholders in a better way. Control. So traditionally, control is seen as something that we comply. These are rules, these are procedures, these are policies that we must be seen to adhere to. And these policies and procedures may have been very appropriate a few years ago, a few decades ago, but they've never been reviewed. There's not an expiration date on these procedures and policies to at least review them and see whether they're still a good fit for the changed organization. The beyond budgeting response would be have goal-focused, accountable teams. Traditionally, information, as I've described a moment ago, is pushed up to authority, those individuals at the apex. The beyond budgeting response is to decentralize that and do so in a transparent way, make things open, share information. Penultimate one is around values. So traditionally, performance reflects the quality of the decisions at the apex of the organization. Remember, they're not the closest to the information or the customers of the problem. The beyond budgeting response is to get customers to articulate, to air what they need and have a pull-based system where a customer has an unmet need, and we're there to serve that need in the fastest way possible to get that competitive advantage. Last one, then I'll pause to see if there's any thoughts or questions. Funding. So in a traditional sense, just finances for the team or project. So it's team-based or project-based. Whereas beyond budgeting would suggest it would be better to actually tie funding to some value stream. So some group of long-lived teams working on a long-lived product or service, rather than disbanding that team or those teams to be reformed on another business endeavor once they've got something into production or they've handed it over to the operations team. So I'm just going to pause there to see if there's any thoughts or questions or anything people would like to share.
For the finances value streams, finance actually will belong to a delivery value stream, because this is the beyond budgeting is exactly what we do apply in SAFE, or the beyond cost accounting with SAFE. So the finance, when we define a delivery value stream, we do include finance, and then this is about participatory budgeting, funding a value stream. So this is what you described on the right-hand side, beyond budgeting. This is when you do agile at scale. Mm-hmm. with SAFE or any other, I would say, scaled agile framework.
Absolutely. So I find it quite intriguing that beyond budgeting also comes to that conclusion as well. So you're right. This is reorganizing the organization based on value streams as something which SAFE and other frameworks would advocate. So yes, yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Dean, if organizations are just starting their Agile journey, are they doing it in pockets and pilots at first, and they haven't made the full switch to value streams, can they still do beyond budgeting, or are there prerequisites? For example, they have to be product led and value stream orientated first?
I don't think it precludes, if an organization is not doing value streams, I don't think it precludes good conversations, as Stephen's mentioned, around uncertainty and around how sure are we that what we're doing is not only going to succeed from a customer point of view, but from a budget point of view as well. So there's good conversations can still happen despite the fact that they may not have orientated to value streams.
Thanks.
For those of us that work in transformation, this is just off the scale radical change. It's just unimaginable. You know, you've got whole swathes of people that don't work like this. You know, what are you going to do with them?
May I pop in?
Please.
I kind of agree and disagree with some elements here, if I may. Concerning the budgeting, no, it is not true that it's not working. It does work. And I used to prepare budgets in several types of industries. It's very important how you work with budgeting, what kind of people you are around with. And yes, it has initial problems. It doesn't predict completely the future, as the economic events constantly are changing. But budgeting does work. Now, the problem is that now it will not work in the future, as the whole economic environment from approximately a year and a half is changing so fast that you simply actually using forecast or reforecast. You're missing this element called reforecast. And also budgeting can be rebudgeting. So I would input these elements because it's quite important. You cannot just do a budget and that's a ceiling. I mean, that's a cement and you will not change it. Yes, you can change it. But again, depending with who are you working with. If you are doing on your own, then you have a problem. But if you're delegating per department or per division, it will work, and it does work. But as I said, I agree with some elements that need changing due to the mindset of human beings that we work with, the philosophy. You have to sell this to the management. Don't forget, these people are narrow-minded. They look like that. They're afraid of the new stuff. You have to sell it, and you cannot just pop in, okay, I want to do this type of budget. It won't work. It will never work.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, depending on the industry, of course. In IT is different ballgame, but in financials, again, different, or architecture, constructions. And I happen to work in so many industries that I know what I'm talking about within European Union, even in England. I used to study there. So Europe is different cookie, as they say, and US is different, or the Asia. So again, it's all in the mindset of the colleagues that we work with, accounts payable, receivables, the accounting department, the finance department. Don't pull them together. They're separate entities within the organization. You can't pull them. And that's what I was lecturing also to the kids in the university. So I've been doing all kinds of stuff in my life, but budgeting is just one part of the agile mindset within finance and accounting. And it's not the most important, the budgeting. You have more important points within the finance, but I'm really excited to see at least we are moving agile within finance. It's wonderful. So I'm not criticizing, I'm just trying to put some points to perhaps to pop in, to polish it, to make it better.
Could I make
thank you for sharing.
Could I make one observation? Cheers. This is really good. I think there's one thing that it's almost like it's not just finance. There's also the HR aspect, because I think you've already mentioned that it's all tied back to, a lot of it tied back to targets and what people, if there's organizations such as Russ's Financial Services where there's big bonuses tied on this. It's a way that the budgets are also a tool for the hammer through whether you're on the naughty list or the good list. So that, and beyond budgeting looks at that in a different way, I'm pretty sure, but that is a massive thing of the assumption that people are only motivated because of their budgets and their targets, and that's a biggie. And I'm sure you might come to it, but I just thought I'd call that one out. So the purpose one, I would be saying it's that executing predefined plan. You've got it, but it also ties back to we're controlling the people, we're getting them to do what we want, especially in a big organization, through the budget.
Actually, I would like to call out that beyond budgeting is not about budgeting. If you actually understand what beyond budgeting is, it's actually about an adaptive management system. The word budgeting is used actually as a generic term for the traditional command and control management model, while it is true that it has the annual budget process at its core. So it describes actually both a management culture and a performance management system. So beyond budgeting actually means beyond command and control towards a management model that's more empowered and adaptive. So it's actually has a budgeting is part of it, but it's not about budgeting. If you ask anybody in beyond budgeting, they actually said perhaps the terminology that they use, they probably should have changed it, because it's not about budgeting. Because everybody look at budgeting, it's not about budgeting. Sorry, I just have to add that.
No, thank you for contributing. That's a great exchange there, guys. Thanks for sharing. And I guess to me, this demonstrates that we are working. It's really good that you guys are from different experiences and backgrounds and organizations, because at the moment we're just having a confluence of ideas. And for a lot of us, I put myself in this place as well, I'm working at the edge of my understanding and experience here. So it's good that we're able to have this place of safety, psychological safety, and kind of challenge each other's thinking. And together we can all kind of move forward with this. So thank you for your contributions. I'm going to move on in the interest of time.
Dean, just a final comment. Nate, absolutely. Please. It is such an important opportunity for all of us to come together for this Agile. So again, it's not a criticism, it's just perhaps to polish even more and more for everyone.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. Totally subscribe. Okay, so let's move on. So we've spoken about the problems with traditional budgeting, spoken about beyond budgeting, and again, I'll emphasize that word beyond. So one of the last contributors made that point very clear. So thank you for doubling down on that. And the next area that I'd like to pick up on is some techniques for agile budgeting. And here's where I'm going to be bringing in some real life examples of where I've seen success by helping to bring those two different areas together. Okay, so one aspect is metered funding. And before going into this, I'd like to introduce Ashby's law of requisite variety. It's from cybernetics, but essentially what it says is that if the external world or the environment which an entity, it could be an organization, it could be a team, operates, has a certain degree of variety, to be able to manage to regulate itself in that environment of variety, it needs to have just as much, if not more, variety in what it does. So I'm bringing us on board because this comes to the products and services, the experiments, the hypothesis that the team, the organization wants to be able to bring to market. So if the market is extremely dynamic and very varied, there's a whole Cambrian explosion of different things happening, then as a team or organization, we need to be able to try and meet that and bring stuff to market to test and learn which ones are going to be a good, say, problem solution fit. So this is where metered funding comes into play. And this is just a process by which we budget, finance, we back certain things depending on where it is in testing the value proposition. So on the left-hand side, this is a very early stage where we have many, many, many different ideas, which both need small amounts of budget, where we're exploring, we've identified an opportunity and we're trying to prove that the opportunity is sound. Not all of these are going to be able to graduate to the next stage where we've defined the problem and we've defined the market, and we feel it's a ripe opportunity for us to explore. And it's fallen in some target segment which actually falls into where we want to go strategically for the organization. And we may be doing this by proving it out with a slightly bigger budget, by running fast experiments with the stakeholders or customers that this organization is serving. And the next stage here is the value proposition is actually tested. And this is where we meet it, or we adjust the finance depending on whether the now smaller number have been successful or not. And we may have actually put together a business model, maybe using something like the business model canvas, to actually find out whether this is actually a viable initiative to continue investing. And as you see, as we get closer and closer to proving these things out, and those which aren't successful fall by the wayside, we then go to scaling. So this ties into the idea of having metered finance to build something, and then to nail it, see if it actually works, and then scale it. And not all of them are going to be able to graduate through those stages. And then these could become like the rising stars for the organization, and those rising stars we want to be able to back, so they become the bread and butter of the new market offering for this organization. We want to be able to commercialize it, we want to make it operational, we want to make it an ongoing concern for the organization. So that metered financing allows this to happen. The next example is actually bringing this to life a little bit more. So this is an example of what we put together for a large UK-based grocery retailer. And this ties in financial approval of governance. So I'm going to be revealing this bit by bit. But first of all, before I reveal it line by line, I just wanted to describe what these columns are. So at the beginning, we have many market offerings, and then as they mature, remember, we are whittling out those offerings which aren't right for the market, and there's a few of those. We have many ideas at the beginning which we have relatively low confidence in, but as we test and learn, as we increase the budget, we are funding those few initiatives or market offerings which are successful. How we measure success at the beginning tends to be on behavioral outcomes. So it's the customers or the stakeholders. Is it beginning to fulfill some kind of unmet need or want or desire? And that's like a leading indicator to suggest this initiative or this product is the right horse to back. And then through this metered finance process, there may be a few which are worthwhile continuing to invest in to operationalize. And then we have the lagging indicators of business impact. Are we getting revenue? Are we getting more growth in a particular area? Are we acquiring new customers in a new geographical territory, for example? So let me bring this to life a little bit more by going through these layers. So very early on, remember, we have many of these possibilities. There's different things we're offering the market, or we believe will be good to the market. We're going to backlog it. And then we're going to backlog it by having an ordered list of hypotheses. And these hypotheses are beliefs that we can bring something to market with a small budget, and we're going to test whether it is successful, and also ensuring that it has strategic alignment as well. To put it on the backlog, we don't need any financial approval for the delivery team to place it on the backlog. Okay, the next stage is to actually build it, and here we want to take a hypothesis-driven approach. We want to run an experiment to prove out whether there's a problem-solution fit. We know there's a problem, we know there's an unmet need. Let's see if there's a solution to bring something to market. Here we might need to inform the CFO, and this could be in an innovation space of the organizations that already have a degree of allowance to run these experiments in a small, safe to learn environment. And we may only be hitting a very, very small percentage of the market here. So here we're informing the CFO. Okay, let's suppose a few of these are successful. So there's few of those. We now actually want to nail it. Not only do we want to see where there's a problem solution fit, we want to see where there's a product market fit. Can we actually take this to a bigger market? And maybe we want to be able to get approval for capital expenditure. If there's a capex of say over £10,000 or euros or whatever the currency may be, we need to get approval. We may need to get approval for operational expense if there's if it's going to be something which is going to be run an expense on an ongoing period of time. We may want to get CFO approval, and we may need to get CEO approval as well. Okay, the next stage is we scale it. These are the few which have been able to get through all those preceding hurdles. Here we may need to put a far more thorough business case together, which needs to go through a more rigorous governance set of steps. And here we need to get the CFO approval and the CEO approval. And then finally, these become the rising stars of the organization, and we need to be able to operate it. We need to be able to operationalize it with built-in with continuous improvements and the right kind of checkpoints, and ensure that we're continuously hitting those measures of success. So this is just a simplified model which was designed for a previous client of mine, and they found this visualization really, really important, and it tied in the right level of governance approval. Remember, the right people making the right decisions at the right time with the right funding. So I'm just going to pause there to see if there's any thoughts or questions on that before I move on.
Dean, we've captured one for the Q&A later because it might be a bigger question to explore.
Okay, awesome. Okay, I'm going to move on. Another principle that I found successful is an adaptation of the classic think big, start small, learn fast. It's not only start small, but budget small as well, as I've mentioned before. And the degree of how small that budget is depends on the degree of complexity of risk and uncertainty. So on the left-hand side here, I've borrowed something from a complexity thinker, Liz Kehoe, and she suggests this could be used as a way of estimating how complex something is. So at the very bottom, we know how to do it. We know how to land this new innovation. We estimate the complexity is fairly low. At the far extreme, nobody in the world has ever done this before. So there's a high degree of complexity. So therefore, to contain risk, and we may actually want to fund the team a small amount of money for a small amount of time to allow them to run some experiments in a safe to learn environment. And if they come back with success, if they're hitting those early success measures, then perhaps we can budget them a little bit more to run some more experiments, to bring it to a new set of stakeholders or a new part of the market so they can expand a little further. So remember I spoke about doing this with a UK supermarket retailer. Here's just a few examples. So one was being able to, let's talk about the low one here. This last one here was to have operational excellence by removing non-value add tasks in their estate of petrol stations. There was lots of inefficiencies with how we were replenishing the stores, for example, the petrol station stores. The complexity to that was pretty low. So we had high confidence we could do this, therefore we could budget higher. On the other hand, we wanted to innovate in some other areas, such as how to run customer service desks. We wanted to have them unmanned and other times have them manned. So I have a colleague running these customer service desks. This was totally new. This was highly complex. So what we did, we only gave them a small amount of budget, and we guided them to only run this experiment in 2 or 3 stores. So here we're thinking big, we're being very ambitious, but if we need to, we limit the time and the budget to a small amount, and we learn fast. We come back to the table, the leaders and stakeholders, to see whether we should continue this initiative. And we're doing this through collective discovery of finance, and finance is there to meet the amount of money which is funded for this endeavor. And just going back to those 3 Ps of persevere if the plan is correct, pivot if we need to, choose a different strategy, or if despite best efforts, we'll pull the plug on that initiative and we'll do something differently. We no longer finance it. Which brings into play this notion of limited liability. So there may be stakeholders or leaders who are quite skeptical and quite nervous and quite naturally apprehensive about whether we should finance something, whether we should innovate something because it's never been done before. There may have been stories historically in the past where it's been a failure. So what we need to do is bring on board this notion of limited liability, of constraining the experimentation to create the safe to learn environment. So there's different ways of doing limited liability. One is time. So if you've got a 2-week time box or a 30-day time box. Another one is finance. I've spoken about that some more. I maybe only give them £10,000. Scope. So you just limit the scope to only a small number of the market or small number of the stores in this retailer. Products. Maybe we only run this experiment a small number of products. And also stakeholder types. So maybe we just want to do this with those early adopters or innovators, stakeholders, rather than all the stakeholders at once, because there could be some laggards or people who are naturally apprehensive. So I just want to, again, bring this to life, a real life example from this retailer. A few years ago, we were trialing what we called at the time the Pay Anywhere app. And this allowed customers to use their mobile phone to scan the barcodes of different food items within the local convenience stores and use Apple Pay to make that purchase and then put those products in their handbag, their rucksack, or whatever it might be, and just walk straight out the store. Naturally, there was concern around theft. Would this increase in the industry, it's called shrink, would this mean that there are more and more customers just stealing products, pretending to use their phone and just putting stuff in their bags and walking out the store? So what we did, we imposed limited liability constraints. So we said, okay, this is only going to work in 2 or 3 stores. So we limited the scope, we limited the financing to only a small budget. We limited the time to a small number of weeks, and we limited the products as well. It was only going to be on a very, very small number of products. It wasn't going to be on alcohol, for example. That's a highly desirable product for a thief to put under their trench coat and walk out the store. And quite importantly, we only worked with a small number of store managers and area managers who had an appetite to create a safe to learn environment, because they could actually see the advantage of allowing customers to make purchases very, very quickly with their phone and not having to go to the end of a queue in front of an aisle. It was a very lean way of managing the store. So that brings into play like working with those innovators and early adopters backed up by a small budget initially. Okay, so I'm coming to the end here, and it'd be fantastic to open up for questions in the last few minutes. I know there's a few questions queued up in the chat as well. So a few takeaways. So how do we increase flexibility of the budget process? And we do this by a number of ways, is looking for opportunities where we can break up that annual budget into to fund small experiments, particularly in the innovation space, where we can find outcomes and to support those teams. And another takeaway as well is look for opportunities where we can run experiments of limited liability. So it's given freedom within those financial constraints. So using notions such as metered financing. I've got some references. So one reference on Beyond Budgeting. So this book was a real help. Also, Eric Ries's newer book, he originally did Lean Startup, but a new book was a great source of help, in addition to the experience I've had in different organizations. And also just recognizing the work of Liz Kehoe here around how to relate the complexity of a particular initiative and how that can relate to how much we should meter finance. So before I forget, I just want to say thank you very much for your evening, and so far kind of creating a good environment for contribution and challenge and discussion. So hopefully I'm going to hand over to Q&A now, and hopefully we can continue that debate. So thank you so far.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks so much. I know, as you can see, as we all can see on this conversation so far, we're all passionate about enhancing organizational agility in our organizations. And, you know, where do you start with this when you want to change your organization? With budgeting and finance, naturally. Each organization's different. We're on our own journeys. And tonight, so far, we've had a really healthy exchange of thoughts, diverse thoughts on diverse facets to keep in mind as we're all, you know, continue on our journeys, and not the least due to your leading and facilitation of this, Dean. So thank you very much. I've captured 2 questions from the audience so far. Giles, you might have captured even more with your hot guy on the chat. So Giles, do you want to start with questions, or do you want me to start with one?
Go for it. I just got to second absolutely everything that Ashley just shared, Dean. Thank you very much. You know, the conversation has been on fire in the chat. So thank you very much to everybody who's been doing it. Ash, I'll hand back over to you to get those questions out, and then open the floor. Anybody who's got a question, please come on cam, come off mute and join in the conversation.
And with the come on cam, come off mute, I'll just say the 2 that I captured, we'll go with Holger first and then Kevin, so you know to get ready. So Holger, if you're still on.
Yes.
The one that I captured from you is, well, it's actually on the growth versus fixed mindset. So your question was, how do we get organizations to think more on creating value instead of saving costs? Is there anything else you'd like to ask to that question before handing it over to the group?
Yeah, well, I'm working in a big traditional organization, and of course, budgeting is always a thing, and they're always thinking of limiting the cost and going down on this, but still expect us to have the same at least outcome or even better. And how do we initiate the change of thinking that they really get the point that they can't overstress us all the time? How to make them think more that it's value oriented. We have to put out. We have to look of or think of outcome and value instead of just pinching money.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love other people to respond to this question as well, because it's one which is particularly pertinent in a fast changing world. And I think Ash mentioned that phrase or that notion of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. So a fixed mindset tends to be one which where the individual, their perception, they think that's very much what reality is, that there's no gap between perception and reality, and they believe that their ways of working, what they've been trained to do and what they've done in the past is very much appropriate for today and also appropriate for tomorrow. So I think growth mindset and fixed mindset plays into it as well. But let me pause there, because I don't want to speak, you know, all the time. So I just want to open up the floor as well. What do people think about Holger's question? Holger, do you want to pose the question again, just to allow people to see where your mind's at?
Hello?
Yes, it's about that organizations should think more about values, creating values, and skip on always this cost saving things, that it's always has to be less expensive, and see that we generate value and profit, and not only reduce the amount of money we spend. We should think of gaining money, and how do we transfer this into the upper management, for example.
But may I ask the question? You are asking why do we focus on cost saving and not on value? But you must also look at what you deliver to the customer, because you know, it doesn't matter if you focus on cost saving if you don't deliver the right thing to the customer. This is how I would present that to the SMT, because quite often they just want sometimes to deliver a project, or they don't even think about a project. And even if it's not, if we deliver a product which is not going to be suited to the customer. So I don't really, so you must, it's not about just the growth mindset, it's really convincing the SMT or the senior stakeholders that they must make sure that what gets delivered, it's really what's needed by the customer. So and that's about also Agile. I would say you can work on the right feature when you are on, but that's more when you have, let's say, an art. I explained them that they can have a feature and they can work on that feature as long as they want, as long as they deliver the feature requested by the customer. They don't care at the end. That's value against, that's how you have to explain what value means to the senior stakeholders and to the finance department.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or responses to that question?
I have one actually. I'm actually sitting in Berlin, and I have noticed that one of the things that seems to happen is a very rapid scale and a reduction in cost, and maybe there is a simulation between those two things. But there tends to be a kind of focus on bringing the cost down rather than getting maybe to the front of the creative sort of creativity and innovation. Maybe it's slightly further down the line. I don't know if there's anything that you would agree with that at all, Olga.
Not necessarily, because I would think that when Dean introduced the lean cycle, that it's like having a lean business case on the MVP at the beginning, because when he presented that his slide about having a business case at the end, I would have a lean business case on the MVP at the beginning, because the MVP is already, you create an early product with a minimum investment required, I would say, to validate the hypothesis. So I would have it the other way around, that's about not having the business case at the end, on building up to that business case,
Yeah, I recognise that as well. I found that quite strange in that particular graphic that MVP was right at the end, whereas it should be a series of MVPs where we're proving out different stages of the business model. Just Andrew, what you've shared brings something to mind, is that cost reduction is something which is quite tangible, and we can have clear evidence if we've been able to achieve more with less. Whereas creating new value, that's intangible, and that is something is harder to measure. So I think there may be something tied to that as well, is that we can clearly see whether we're hitting the mark or not through cost savings, whereas new value is more uncertain and less likely to kind of know whether we're right or wrong.
My experience also is that I worked in a startup. We built the business up to a certain part, it got to the specialist stage, and then there was very much a homogenization of the business to make it easily rolled out faster. So could
I throw in just something I seem to recall from Les, as in that framework. So I'm not trying to be framework friendly here, but I think some of the systems thinking cycles where cost has a link to losing people, has a link to motivation, and those assumptions, some of the work in the less environment would actually call this out, the cost cutting versus adding value. So I think Holger originally asked for approaches. Having a look at some of the less techniques might be able to help.
Okay.
And look at doing both, because I work in a company, I mean, COVID has impacted organizations in multiple ways, right? Where some had to get quite reactive and go into instant cost cutting, but cost cutting is not the end all be all. You can have your eye on both prizes of the instant cost cutting to, reduce overheads and the overall cost to operate. But then you can look at other things in addition to cost cutting of what is the profitability of your product lines and your efficiency, as well as the value adding, focus that the wheel can keep going on that as well. So, you can't switch it overnight, and it comes down to the company's appetite for risk, especially in response to COVID. And you can't just say people, oh, here's the the brilliance of value adding techniques, when actually you might actually need to cut your cost base a bit. So maybe play the politics role a bit, do a bit of the cost cutting, but then also keep planting the seeds for everything else that should be done in parallel. Otherwise you miss the boat if you don't set the groundwork in the right time. Right, shall we go on to the next question? And then Holger, I know you added another question, but let's get to Kevin first and then come back if that's okay. So Kevin, Thomas, if you're still on the line, you said you're often told by finance colleagues that the problem with the metered approach is that most of the money is spent during validation, like coding, the MVP experimentation. So by the time you decide you don't want to invest more, it's too late. So that's a statement and kind of a question. Are there ways around it? Are there better practices to be followed perhaps? But Kevin, over to you maybe to express that in your own words.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. So additional context to that is I'm coming at this from the angle solely of tech investment, right? So not investment outside of product and tech. So one of the challenges I always find we face is nobody is either able to give me a good estimate of value delivered at the early stage before any MVPs or experimentation is done.
Oh, Kevin, can you speak up just a little bit closer to the microphone, please? Thanks.
Yeah. So what I was saying was one of the problems we face in our business is people are unable to give us not even an accurate estimate of value delivered, even just a solid rationale for how they come up with the value, right? That would even be a step in the right direction, and a consistent rationale with the competing projects. So that's one challenge. And then the second challenge is, let's say you get all of that right, is with kind of the stage gating, which I completely agree with, the graph that Dean showed. I think that's like the right direction to go in, but it just feels like it's, by the time you get the information to be able to stop the investment, it's almost too late, right? The developer's already done the effort. So yeah, I was just wondering what everybody's thoughts were on the challenge there.
I'll respond to that, the first part of that, the first question out of the two. And I share your experiences that at the very beginning, I found it very challenging to coach people to be able to articulate the value proposition of their experiment. We had these experiment cards where they needed to write down their belief, their assumption, or their conviction. And they weren't used to thinking in that way. But it's really important to know why we're about to embark on this initiative of any length or funded by any kind of budget. So I recognize, if I've understood your question correctly, I recognize that. And I think our role as, we can put our coaching hat on, ask probing questions and allow them to articulate it, maybe using something like an experiment card.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, like, the two techniques actually go hand in hand, right? You can have an annual planning cycle where you're allocated a budget, but you still need that stage gating within that pot that you've been allocated to ensure that you're utilizing it efficiently, right? So you're not constantly coming back to the exec to ask for more, or, ultimately the management board and the decision makers, they need to be able to quickly understand what everybody in that tech resource is doing, right? And the only way to do that would be to have this kind of stage gate and governance.
Yeah, and the stage gate and governance, I mean, governance tends to be a dirty word, but done in the right way, supported governance can be extremely powerful and enabling within reasonable constraints. That phrase that I mentioned before is the right people making the right decisions at the right time with the right funding, and that could be tied into, say, 30-day goals or 90-day goals or annual ambitions, all tied up, aligned like a true north to what we want to do as an organization. It's kind of federated and broken down into the different business areas and units. So I think that governance and finance bit, financial controls bit is really important. I'll pause there to allow other people to share their thinking.
But all the initiatives, because before they go into that funnel stage, they are aligned to some strategic themes. And those strategic themes are the ones that the senior stakeholders approved and validated. So there is definitely an alignment between those initiatives on the strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually got an example of how we did this at another organization, and the team came up with a vision statement which was shared with the leaders, and it's almost like a back briefing technique, as the leaders are given a team some kind of mission, and the team wants to articulate that back to make sure their understanding is correct, and maybe they want to tweak it as well. I'll just read it out really quickly. We'll save money by eliminating impediments to deliver a frictionless customer experience that's easy for colleagues to deliver. And then we had some KPIs, decrease cost to serve, increase net promoter for the customers, and increase incremental sales. So it's all about articulating the North Star, with the leaders signed up to it to back them as well, to support them with some key KPIs, or the fashion these days is to use OKRs.
Okay.
But that alignment is really important. And then the team have freedom to choose different strategies, but within those limited liability constraints or metered financing, of saying, okay, for these strategies, you've got this amount of money and this amount of time, come back to us, like an episode of Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, I think they call it in America. That's the kind of thing that we created.
There are also what we call budget guardrails, let's say, finding the right balance between long-term, short-term investments but that's more about, that's what we apply in SAFE. So, but I think all the scaled approaches have talked about are saying the same thing.
All right, guys, time for one more question. And Holger, you were on fire, so the last one is going to be yours, my friend. It's a good one. It's a strong one. Holger asks, what about, oh, sorry, Holger, go ahead. You just go ahead and ask it, Holger.
Sorry. Yeah, I was thinking about the limitations our senior management maybe has, and especially when they are in a listed company on a stock exchange, and they have to always convince the analysts and so on to get their money in there, how to report things and so on. And how do we create some change of mind in this analyst, and how do we get this in the stock exchange, let's say? How do we approach it? How would we help our senior managers to improve their situation, that we get all our flexible, agile money and so on to create business value? I hope I got it across.
I can give a quick response. This is my thinking. This is an article which I read and it kind of hit home to me. And that is being able to speak the language of the CFO, and notions of portfolio diversification in a fast moving market. I think the shareholders would recognize that, maybe they're being undercut by disruptive organizations. So we need to diversify our portfolio. Things such as tangible and intangible investments. So we need to have a pot of money, a discovery pot of money for intangible investments, to try and create a new future, which we cannot fully realize, but perhaps that's beginning to speak the language of the CFO and the management of the city. So optionality may be another phrase as well, is that we want to be able to create optionality within our portfolio of products and services to be able to move to a new market. And I can see that on a financial statement or something like that. I'm talking on the edge of my understanding, so I'm going to shut up now. And I think Russ is gesticulating. so perhaps, Russ, you want to share something?
I can't share that. That's for Ashley.
Okay.
Look, guys, I've got to say a massive thank you to Dean once again. This is exactly what these sessions are for. Ash is, cheering away. This is exactly it, to have that sort of community element to come in, share some thought leadership with us, and then get that open dialogue happening, and getting everybody to take part in this open discussion. And I've got to say thank you very much so many people, everybody here who've added value into the conversation this evening, this morning, this afternoon. Again, I always have to remind myself that everyone's GPS is different around the world. I just got to say, thank you again, Dean, for actually being the catalyst of that conversation and getting so many people, Valerie, Rebecca, Andrew, Kevin, Stephen. I mean, apologies if I've missed anyone out, but everybody who's actually been part of the conversation today has been phenomenal. Right, and I know personally I'm taking away some learnings, and I think actually there's more to come on this. Now, Ashley and myself are sat there sort of going, right, what's next? How do we take this to part 2, part 3, and have more of these finance agile conversations? So we're going to sort of work on that and think about what we can plan next at some future events. And Dean, certainly would love to have you back and come and do some more of this and get the audience engaged as you've done tonight. So thanks again, Dean, for being here. Awesome. Thank you very much to everybody in the audience who came along and joined into conversation. And we will look forward to seeing you soon. To let you know, we've got some events coming up. So we've actually got a bit more of an open mic night on the 16th with an Ask Us Anything Business Agility evening on the 16th, with myself and Ashley hosting that. That will be more of an open mic night for organic conversation to happen with the audience. So if you do have any things you want to share and get the audience to participate in, please do come along to that. Then we've got Pat Hoverstadt coming along to talk to us about transformation in the beginning of April, followed by a good friend of the group, Alkesh, who's going to come along and talk about how safe is safe. And then leading on into May, which is soon going to be coming up, we're going to be having a panel discussion around organizational agility. And we've got some surprise guests from the world of Agile HR, Agile Sales, Agile Marketing, and Agile Finance. So stay tuned and watch this space. So there's a whole jam-packed sequence of meetups to come over the next few weeks and months. So look forward to having everybody back soon. Take care. Hope everyone's had a great evening and see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, man.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.